but I am committed to knowledge and power and all the ways that we can get it. And I'm happy to talk with people who are actually doing it. And this woman is one of the folk out there doing it. She is the editor, publisher, founder of MLK50, Justice Through Journalism. Let me welcome the great Wendi C. Thomas. Hi.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here today.
Listen, as a former journalist, I have been completely disgusted by what what the media has become.
Hmm.
And so when I looked at MLK50, it gave me joy. You know, it reminded me of Charles Loeb and all of those journalists from back in the day who took their expertise and told the stories that needed to be told from the community's perspective, centering what was needed in the community. And then it ended up being needed in the rest of the country and the world. So is that the impetus for you founding MLK50 on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely wanted to force people to consider, specifically in Memphis, what we had done with Dr. King's sacrifice. I could tell the city was about to go into celebration mode, act like everything had changed, focus on, the I have a dream speech, the part about little Black boys and little white boys holding hands. But the reality is that a lot of people in Memphis were still poor. Workers were still struggling. There were sanitation workers who went on strike in 1968, who were still on the job in 2018 because they couldn't afford to retire. And I just could not, as a journalist, let those things go uncommented on, and act like this was a party when we really needed to be recommitting ourselves to King's dream of economic justice.
So you're from Ohio.
I am a Buckeye.
So what's your connection to Memphis? Why Memphis?
My daddy moved here to work at then Memphis State in 1980. And so my family moved here. So depending on the audience, I can claim to be like from the North or the South, but I've spent most of my career in Memphis and most of my life in the South.
We got a front seat to some Tennessee politics, several weeks ago. And, I feel like a lot of that was performative. And so we haven't heard much since, and this is how it happens, right? The stories are big and then they go away. We lose it. Then the next big thing happens, but people are still living under an apartheid system. Things are still not right. People still don't have rights. So what you're doing with MLK50 is important because you're going to continue to remind us about Tyree Nichols and what's happening there, the 5 children that were taken after a traffic stop, they've been returned. So you're doing follow-up work when, everyone has moved on. How difficult is that for you?
I mean, it's not the easiest thing to do to start your own newsroom in the South with no money, just an idea and a dream, but it is most rewarding work that I have ever done. And on the covenant, we had the Tennessee 3, they got expelled, and then 2 of them got expelled and then promptly sent back, which was the right decision for those local elected bodies to make. But I just saw before I signed on here that the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee, has announced a special section to deal with gun reform. I put that in the biggest of air quotes, August 21st. And so that'll be, 4 or 5 months since the actual Covenant school shooting. And the proposal that he's made, I don't see how it's going to make any kind of meaningful change. And gun violence, as we saw just from this weekend in Texas, is still a real pressing issue in this country. I was at Target yesterday with my niece and nephew, and for a moment I paused. I said, should I even be in here? I mean, that's how scared you can become in a community that isn't necessarily unsafe, but the policies are unhinged, right? And it allows for people to do crazy things with weapons they should never own. And I'm glad that I work with journalists who believe it doesn't have to be that way. This isn't your typical both sides, she said newsroom. We believe there's some things that are fundamental truths about life, and that's how we approach the news and what we do.
Love it. Wendi C. Thomas, what was the moment that you said, okay, because I'm always challenging, and Joe Madison as well, and everyone, Lavree, Clay, challenging people to do, right? It's easy to talk, it's easy to complain, but to get up off the couch and do something. What was there a moment? Was there an incident? Was it just that the celebration was happening and you were like, but there are real stories going on? Not that the 50th anniversary shouldn't be commemorated, Martin Luther King's death shouldn't be commemorated, but we have issues here. What was that moment for you that made you decide to start a whole news outlet?
Yeah, I think if I had to go back, I'd probably go back to 2008 when I was at the daily paper in Memphis, the Commercial Appeal. I was an assistant managing editor there and Metro columnist, and I helped coordinate their coverage of the 40th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And so I'd been thinking since then, what would it look like as a journalist to mark the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination? Of course, we had the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, Brown v. Board of Education. And so you're having these milestones come up. And thinking about as a journalist, what would be my role? In 2014, I ended up leaving the paper because of the short version would be white supremacy, patriarchy, that sort of thing, and went to Harvard and did a Neiman Fellowship. And it was there where I was like, okay, this is my moment, right? I didn't have a plan B. Well, actually, my plan B was to go work at the utility company in the PR department. But I was like, I'm gonna give this journalism thing another go and try to start my own news organization. I took a class in social entrepreneurship at Harvard, and the professor told me when I presented my project that it was not viable. It was not viable. And so I was like, okay, watch me. So that kind of black woman indignation kind of rose up, and I was like, I can show you better than I can tell you. And so
come on.
That's what we did.
That's sometimes the best thing in the world is for somebody to tell you what you can't do because of their limitations, right? Because they don't see you. Which is why it's important for us to see each other and see ourselves, right? Because this world will tell you you're diminished and that you're not worthy, that you're not good enough. And it's the mantra that it has to happen in order for the power structure to maintain, because it knows the truth. It knows it would completely be dismantled if we ever walk into our purpose and our actual power, our lived power. So what was the first thing you did, Wendi C. Thomas, after he told you that it wasn't viable at Harvard? Because that's the pinnacle. Of course, they know more.
Right. So that professor told me it wasn't possible. And I remember I went over to a professor at MIT. I was taking a class from him, and I was, nearly in tears. I was like, am I crazy? Am I stupid? He was like, oh, no. You can do it. Not only can you do it, you must do it. So for everyone you have in your ear telling you it can't be done, there's always other people you can listen to who are like, you can actually make this happen. So I came back to Memphis and I raised a grand total of $3,000 from college classmate, a girlfriend, and then my favorite uncle in DC. And I hope my other uncles don't hear that, but one of my favorite uncles my uncle that lives in DC.
Well, he gave you money. They didn't. So yeah, he earned that position.
So we launched, our first stories was actually about, I had a freelancer do this, was about what share of executive jobs versus like lower level jobs Black and white people own. It was, I think, a Bureau of Labor Statistics report that just showed, again, how far we had not come, and still having white men dominating these top roles, even though we're trying to sing, we shall overcome, and Black people concentrated in lower level jobs. All labor has value, but when we think about economic stability and the ability to build some kind of wealth, pass on an inheritance to your children, most people make their money through their primary jobs, and still Black people were being relegated to these lower levels of employment.
Walk us through, all right, $3,000. What does that get you? Like, all right, so fortunately, 20, 30 years ago, it would be a lot more difficult, because to build a website, I remember in the 90s, it cost like a couple of $100,000 to build a website, then the staff, and like you needed bank. So with $3,000, you got a domain name.
We used Medium. That's what our first medium.com was, where we published. It was like a blog, really. I don't know, real website, but it was free, right? So that's where we published our stories. I tell people I lived off credit cards for the first 18 months while I was building this. And anybody who's had serious debt knows that when you wake up in the middle of the night and you think about it, you cannot go back to sleep. And so I have never worked harder than I did when I was working for myself. But we eventually were able to find some funders who believed in what we were doing. Our first grant, I think, was $100,000 from the Surdna Foundation. That allowed us to pay people. We had freelancers that we were paying because we believe in paying workers what they're due. We never asked anybody to work for free. Well, I was the only one working for free, but we never asked people to work for free, and just gradually raised money. We launched in April 2017. We just marked our 6th birthday. And in January, we were able to announce that we had gotten a $2 million over 5-year grant from the Ford Foundation.
Come on through, Darren. You better do that. Yes.
Some bills, for several years out. And so, hard work, not always, but often can pay off.
But you had to first show and prove. Like, I feel like a lot of times people are looking for that instant, this idea is great, but Wendi C. Thomas actually went out and did the thing for 5 years before the money actually caught up, the real money, because that $100,000 could go in a couple of months for real, so to be in a situation where you're so committed to the outcome. I was asking you off mic, and the number here is 866-801-8255, because I'm incredibly invested in what you're doing and want to magnify it, because I believe if we have a MLK50 in every city, that all of these politicians will be held accountable. All of the stories that need to be told will be told, because everything is local. All politics is local, but we're so inundated with this stuff that has nothing to do with us. But our garbage being collected, our water, our schools, with our teachers, what's happening there, local, which is why they were able to hijack across the country, because they understood the local dynamics, which is why there's an apartheid state in Florida and Texas and South Carolina and other places, because they know local. We don't do local. This is important.
Yeah. I think there definitely is a need for something like MLK50 in every urban center. And luckily, we're part of a network of nonprofit newsrooms, Black-led, across the country that are doing good work. So in New York, you have Documented New York, focusing on the immigrant population. In the Twin Cities, you've got Sahan Journal, doing some really, really good work there. In Detroit, you've got Outlier Media. Out in California, you've got Berkeley Side. In Atlanta, you've got Capital B. So there are folks out here, I think, who are newsrooms out here who are liberation minded, who are being led by people of color, mostly Black people, who are putting in this work. And I think philanthropy is starting to recognize that they've got to step in and fill this gap with the demise of more traditional media outlets, especially legacy newspapers.
You said something about journalists should be serving, not extracting.
Yeah.
Talk about that, Wendi. Like the role of journalism is to do what? Wendi C. Thomas.
It's to serve the people, to meet their needs. People say, well, what would your goal with creating MLK50? And I have 2 answers. One is to completely dismantle the status quo. Like, that's what we're here to do, but also to make a tangible, measurable difference in the lives of the most vulnerable people in Memphis, the people who have been pushed to the margins. And I think that's what we do. I think, but traditionally journalism, we, how it is, reporters pop into a community, they get people to tell them something, they put it on TV, they put it in the newspaper, and then they're gone. There's no more communication, there's no more interaction, and we're not actually giving anything to people. We're taking. And so I think the way we try to do things differently, I'll just give you one example. Of course, after the emergency rental relief money, kind of disappeared, and we came out of that phase, not disappeared, but we moved out of that phase, evictions started to rise again across the country. And that was true here in Memphis. And, our reporter, Jacob Steiner, one of our reporters, went to eviction court all the time. And you would see these people facing off with, the landlord's attorney and the judge, and they had no idea what was going on. Like, the process, if you've never gone through it, it's opaque. People are using language, you don't know what that means. And so we wrote an eviction guide to tell people, this is what happens. And when you go there, this is what you can say to the judge. This is the language you should use to get a continuance. When you need to come back with paperwork, this is what you should have. You need some resources because you can't afford a lawyer. Here's where you go. And we distributed those by hand in communities here. So trying to get people information they can use to not get put out on the streets. And what could be more important than housing, having a place to lay your head.
Amen. And it's on MLK50.com, MLK50.com under housing, eviction resources, eviction guide. and what to do if there's no shelter. If you have no shelter, there's stories, 5 lessons I learned from talking to unhoused people. I feel like the role of media is dissemination. I tell this to my students, it's dissemination, but you as the journalist have to show up fully. I remember being a young reporter at the Daily News. Editors would send me out, all of the melanemic, all of the male, and tell me what the story was. And I always, as a 23-year-old, I was like, I haven't even got out there yet. How are you telling me what the angle is? And it was in that moment I realized, oh, okay, I could follow this and do no good, and rise, because when you give people what they're looking for, they love that, right? Or I can actually make a difference and tell people stories the way they should be told. And so I made a conscious decision, but it's crazy. And it's even crazier now because you have people who don't even know how to edit. Like, I'm just like, whoa, I'm looking at what's out there. Like, we are doomed. But then I see you and I get hope, which is why I was like, come on through. On your site, you also have, before you talk to a journalist. Yeah. What was the impetus? That's powerful. I'm like, I need to study this.
Yeah, well, it was because it was, again, about that not wanting to exploit people. A lot of people, most people don't never talk to a journalist. Someone shows up, sticks a camera in their face, or they're carrying a notebook and they're asking them questions about their lives, they're getting their names, and they don't know where that information is going to go, show up, what have you. And, we have a lot of relationships with people in the activist and organizing community. And we wanted people to know, if someone comes up to you and is like, hey, I want to ask questions. You are in a position of power in that situation. You should push back. You want to know, where is this going to go? Who are they? You want to check out what their website. You may just look at the website and be like, I don't want to be a part of that. What does it mean to go off the record? Say something on background. We don't teach people. Journalists typically don't teach people how to do that. But I think that's not a mistake, right? We want the situation to be a power dynamic where you don't know what's going to happen. You, the source, don't know what's going to happen, and we have all the power and control. And it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that.
Wendi with an I, Thomas. Wendi _C_Thomas. Wendi with an I. Let's go to the phones. The number here is 866-801-8255. Let's head over to Tennessee, your backyard, and welcome in State Representative Karen Camper. Okay. All right. State Rep Karen Camper, welcome.
Hey, Karen, how are you? Hey, Wendi.
How are you, Representative?
I'm so proud of her, Karen. She's always been one to push the envelope in her writing. I remember her daily, her column she used to do that we used to all wait with bated breath to see what Wendi had to say about the subject matter. So proud of her. I'm proud of you, all the things you're doing. I know you left, came back home to Memphis, and have really made a difference with the publication. And I just wanted to let you know there's a lot of people rooting for you and a lot of people that are really proud of what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That means a lot.
And State Rep, how important is it to have someone like Wendi Thomas and MLK50 for the work that you need to do?
It's very important because you really need someone that's going to be honest and true to the people and make sure that those voices are heard, even when it's uncomfortable for people. Even when it's uncomfortable for us sometimes as legislators or elected officials, you still need to know. You still need to, hear what the people are saying in your own decision making. And she's always been like that. I mean, on a lot of work she's done over the years, she's always been that person. And sometimes you may or may not agree. You may feel like your feathers been ruffled a little bit, but it's really important to do and to have that voice that's just out there that when you get it, it's the truth, it's raw, it's what you need. You take it and you move on and you use it in your daily work. And so that's what she's been for Memphis. And with Memphis being, predominantly African-American community, sometimes people don't really want to hear what that voice is saying. But she makes sure that people hear that voice. And it means a lot to us. And I want you to know that, Wendi. It does.
Thank you.
State Rep Camper, thank you for calling. It's lovely to have people listening and just calling up and saying, hey, Appreciate that. Is this duplicatable? I asked you this. I started asking you this question before we came on the air. Wendi Thomas, founder, editor, publisher of MLK50. I feel like if you put the system together, that we can just rinse and repeat and just, with the right resources. Like, so what would it take if Newark, New Jersey, or Baltimore, which now Maryland has a Black governor, but Baltimore has some issue. I feel like Baltimore is on the rise. Like that could be a Mecca. We see what's happening in Atlanta, but there's some places in South Carolina is right there. North Carolina is right there. Georgia, we can't relax just because you got Warnock and Ossoff, and Kemp is still a problem. In the next election, Georgia could flip back real easily if we relax. Like, we need media with the foot on the gas.
Right.
Thoughts about that?
Yes, I think the model of what we do and the focus of what we do, poverty, power, and policy, could absolutely be exported to other places. And like I said earlier, I think there's some newsrooms out there that are doing that. In Baltimore, you've got Baltimore Beat, led by Lisa Snowden, Black woman. So you have people doing that. I think it's really important for the community itself. I wouldn't want to say, okay, hey, this is MLK50, here's the model. You do exactly this, right? Because it's a little different in different communities. And the people on the ground know best. So I think community-led newsrooms are important. But, I get calls all the time from people who are trying to start something up. They're like, hey, I see what you've done. Can you give me some advice? I'm like, raise some money. Don't go into credit card debt like that.
Don't do what I did.
But if you are passionate about it, and this may be a little Pollyannish, but and definitely said with all the privilege that I've enjoyed in my life. But I think if you are determined to do it, it can get done. And there's lots of support now in this nonprofit news industry, the Institute for Nonprofit News, local independent online publishers that have all these resources where you don't have to do like I do and kind of fumble around blindly and make a lot of mistakes. There's roadmaps to do this, and it's possible.
Your biggest joy in doing MLK50, Wendi, what is the thing that brings you the most joy about this work?
Yeah, so I think, I began my career as a reporter, and so that's my background. I've spent a lot of time in management, but I like to write and I like to report. And I think my biggest joy of my career so far came in 2019 when I did an investigation into the debt collection practices of a nonprofit hospital here. I won't go into the whole story, but they were suing hundreds and hundreds of people a year, dragging them into court, even though they're nonprofit and are supposed to be providing a lot of charity care. These people's mistake in court, these defendants, their only mistake was being poor and sick at the same time. And to see all these defendants, most of them Black women, being dragged and have their lives ruined, their paychecks garnished because of this hospital that, of course, was making money, paying its executives very, very well. We had to put them on blast, and we did. And the hospital ended up making significant changes, including overhauling its charity care policy to make it twice as generous as it had been before. They raised the pay of their lowest paid workers from $10 an hour to $15 an hour because, yes, they were suing their own employees too. And they ended up erasing nearly $12 million worth of hospital debt for more than 5,300 defendants. One of those defendants was a woman, Miss Carey, who I met at court. She really reminded me of my mother, the kind of real modest woman, no makeup, wear a line slip and a slip, like that level of modesty. And Miss Carey had about $32,000 in debt, which was twice what she'd made the previous year. If she paid it off as ordered, she would be 90 years old by the time she paid off that debt.
Wow.
Miss Carey had her debt forgiven. She went to church and she praised God. She got a good shout on. And to be able to see that, and know that the difference that made in her life and the life of the people that I will never meet makes the work worth it.